If your cucumber plants looked healthy just a week ago, but today the leaves are starting to wilt and the vines seem to be giving up, then there is a good chance you are fighting the wrong enemy. Most people see a few small beetles chewing on the leaves and think the damage is only cosmetic. They spray something or simply ignore them because the holes seem harmless. I made that same mistake years ago and I paid for it with almost my entire cucumber harvest. The worst part was that the beetles were never the real problem. The real problem was something they carried from one plant to another without me noticing until it was already too late. Once I understood that, everything changed, and I stopped losing healthy plants for reasons that seemed impossible to explain. I want to save you from making that same mistake because if you catch this early, you can protect your garden with a few simple methods that do not cost much money and do not take much effort. You do not need expensive chemicals or complicated equipment. You only need to understand what is really happening every time those striped or spotted cucumber beetles land on your plants. Many people over 50 tell me they remember when cucumbers seemed much easier to grow. They blame the weather, or the seeds, or even bad luck. But I have learned that paying attention to the small signs makes a much bigger difference than buying another bottle from the garden center. Those little yellow and black beetles may look harmless, but they can spread bacterial wilt from one plant to another before you even notice the first warning signs. That disease cannot simply be washed away once it is inside the plant, and that is why acting early matters so much. I was shown a few simple tricks many years ago, and later I noticed that gardeners across America were using the same ideas because they actually worked in real gardens. One of them looks almost too simple to believe, and another protects young plants before the beetles ever have a chance to reach them. Most gardeners skip these steps because they think they are unnecessary until they lose half their crop. I want to show you exactly why these old practical habits are still worth using today, because the next step is where most people unknowingly give the cucumber beetles the perfect opportunity to win. The biggest mistake most people make is trying to fight cucumber beetles only after they see serious damage. By then, those insects may have already done the one thing you cannot easily undo. They may have carried bacterial wilt from one cucumber plant to another while feeding for only a few moments. I learned that lesson the hard way, and since then I stopped waiting for obvious signs of trouble. Now, I watch the garden differently. I pay attention to the first beetle instead of the 100th. That simple change has probably saved more cucumber plants than anything else I have ever done. One method I borrowed from American gardeners is surprisingly simple. They place bright yellow sticky traps around the cucumber bed before the beetles become a real problem. At first, I thought those traps were made only to catch flies, but they work because cucumber beetles are naturally attracted to yellow. They fly toward the color, and many of them never reach the plants at all. It is not a magic solution, and it will never catch every single beetle, but it gives you an early warning and reduces the number of insects that can spread disease through the garden. I like placing the traps just above the leaves where they are easy to notice. Every morning, I take a quick look while watering, and if I suddenly see more beetles than usual, I know it is time to protect the plants before the damage grows. Another method that impressed me even more was using lightweight row covers. Many experienced gardeners place this protective fabric over young cucumber plants right after planting. The cover lets sunlight, rain, and fresh air reach the plants while keeping cucumber beetles away during the most vulnerable stage of growth. Most people think the fabric will slow the plants down, but the opposite often happens because the young vines are left in peace to grow strong roots and healthy leaves. The important part is remembering to remove the covers once flowering begins so bees can reach the blossoms and pollinate the crop. That small detail is where many people make another mistake. They protect the plants, but forget that cucumbers still need pollinators to produce fruit. There is another problem that often appears after the beetles are finally under control, and many gardeners believe it comes from the same cause, even though it does not. This second problem starts with a white powder on the leaves, and if you ignore it for too long, your harvest can slowly disappear as well. Once I finally learned how to keep cucumber beetles under control, I thought the hard part was over. Then, one summer, I walked into the garden and noticed something that looked almost harmless. A few leaves had a light white coating as if someone had dusted them with flour during the night. I almost ignored it because the plants were still producing cucumbers and everything seemed normal. That turned out to be another mistake that many gardeners make. That white powder slowly spreads from leaf to leaf until the plant has a harder time using sunlight to grow strong vines and healthy fruit. The harvest becomes smaller and the vines begin to look tired long before the season should be ending. The good news is that this problem often gives you enough time to act if you notice it early. Over the years, I watched many American gardeners compare simple homemade sprays instead of immediately reaching for stronger products. I became curious and decided to try the same approach in my own garden. One of the oldest methods uses ordinary milk mixed with water. It sounds almost too simple, but many gardeners have reported good results when they spray the leaves regularly before the problem becomes severe. Another popular homemade mixture combines baking soda with water and a small amount of mild liquid soap, so the spray stays on the leaves better. The goal is not to perform a miracle overnight, but to make conditions less favorable for powdery mildew while continuing to remove badly infected leaves and improving air circulation around the plants. Then there is neem oil, which many gardeners choose because it can help reduce several common garden problems when used according to the label directions. I have found that no single spray works perfectly in every situation, because weather, humidity, and timing all matter. What has worked best for me is catching the first signs early instead of waiting until every leaf is covered. Most people make the mistake here because they spray once and expect the problem to disappear forever. Gardening rarely works that way. A little attention every few days usually gives much better results than one big effort after the plants are already struggling. There is one small habit that ties all these methods together and costs almost nothing, but it quietly makes every spray and every protective step work much better than most people expect. That simple habit is probably the easiest change you can make in your cucumber patch. The habit that changed everything for me was much simpler than any spray or trap. I stopped watering my cucumber plants the way I had done for years. Like many people, I used to stand there with the hose and spray everything until the leaves were dripping wet because I thought more water meant healthier plants. In reality, I was helping powdery mildew spread faster. Today, I water only at the base of the plants whenever possible, and I try to do it early in the morning. That gives the soil plenty of moisture while allowing any splashes on the leaves to dry quickly as the day warms up. It is one of those old gardening habits that costs nothing but pays back every season. Another thing I do is keep the vines from becoming too crowded. Many gardeners are excited to see thick green growth because it looks healthy, but when the leaves become packed together, very little fresh air moves through the plant. Moisture stays trapped and diseases have a much easier time taking hold. Every few days, I quietly remove an old yellow leaf or one that is badly affected by powdery mildew. I never strip the plant bare because it still needs plenty of leaves to feed the fruit, but opening a little space allows sunlight and fresh air to reach places that usually stay damp. Most people never think about this small detail and then wonder why the disease keeps returning even after spraying. Years ago, an older gardener showed me something else that I have never forgotten. He said, "Never leave badly infected leaves lying beside the cucumber bed because they continue causing trouble even after you remove them." I always collect them in a bucket and throw them away instead of adding them to my compost pile if the infection is severe. That simple habit keeps the problem from building up around the garden. While I continue checking the sticky traps for cucumber beetles, I also inspect both sides of several leaves every morning. It only takes a minute or two, but those few minutes tell me far more than waiting until the plants begin to fail. Sometimes I find the first tiny white patch of powdery mildew. Other times I spot the first striped beetle before it has time to spread through the entire bed. Small actions taken early are usually much easier than trying to rescue a garden after serious damage has already happened. There is one more old habit that many experienced gardeners still follow, and it quietly makes cucumber plants stronger, before insects and diseases even have the chance to become a real problem. One lesson took me much longer to learn than it should have because I kept looking for a quick fix instead of building stronger plants from the beginning. Healthy cucumber plants can handle small problems much better than weak ones, and that is why I now spend more time preventing trouble than fighting it later. One of the simplest things I do is give every plant enough space. It is tempting to squeeze in a few extra seedlings because we all hope for a bigger harvest, but crowded plants compete for light and fresh air. The leaves stay damp longer after rain or morning dew, and both cucumber beetles and powdery mildew seem to become much harder to control. Most people make the mistake right here because a full garden looks beautiful early in the season, but a few weeks later the vines become tangled, and it is almost impossible to inspect them properly. I would rather grow fewer healthy plants than many struggling ones. Another habit that has served me well is adding a layer of mulch around the base of the plants. Straw, untreated grass clippings, or shredded leaves all help keep the soil evenly moist and reduce splashing when it rains. That splash may seem unimportant, but it can move disease from the soil onto the lower leaves. It also saves water because the ground stays cooler and does not dry out as quickly during hot weather. That means fewer long watering sessions and healthier roots at the same time. Every few days I walk slowly through the garden without carrying any tools. I simply look at the leaves, the stems, and the flowers. I check under a few leaves because cucumber beetles often hide where many people never think to look. I also watch for the very first pale spots that may become powdery mildew later. Those quiet morning walks have probably prevented more problems than any product I have ever bought. Many years ago, an older gardener told me that a garden speaks softly before it starts shouting. I did not fully understand what he meant until I began paying attention. Today, I know that the first warning signs are almost always small if you are willing to notice them. By the time the whole plant looks sick, the battle has already become much harder. There is one final approach that brings all these simple habits together and gives me peace of mind every growing season, because it reminds me that gardening is not about finding one perfect solution, but about making many small decisions that work together from the first day until the final harvest. After following these simple habits season after season, I stopped feeling like I was constantly fighting my garden. Instead, I started working with it. That may sound like a small difference, but it completely changed the way I grow cucumbers. I no longer rush outside every time I see a beetle because I already have yellow sticky traps helping me watch the situation. I no longer panic when I hear people talking about bacterial wilt because I know my young plants were protected with row covers during their most vulnerable stage. I no longer wait until powdery mildew covers half the garden before taking action, because I have learned to notice the first small warning signs. Those simple routines save me time, money, and disappointment every single year. What I appreciate most is that none of these methods are difficult. You do not need expensive equipment or a shelf full of products from the garden store. Most of what I use is inexpensive, and some of it costs almost nothing at all. A few sticky traps, a lightweight row, cover a simple homemade milk or baking soda spray when needed, and careful watering at the base of the plants have done far more for my harvest than chasing every new gardening product that promises miracles. I have also learned that healthy plants recover much faster from small problems than weak plants ever will. That is why I focus on good spacing, steady watering, healthy soil, and regular observation instead of waiting for trouble to force me into action. Most gardeners miss this because they are searching for one perfect answer, when the real secret is several small habits working together. None of them seem impressive by themselves, but together they create a garden that stays productive much longer. Every season teaches me something new, and every season reminds me that patience usually wins over rushing. Even when I lose a leaf or two, I know that does not mean I have lost the crop. A calm response almost always gives better results than reacting too late with stronger treatments. If you begin using even a few of these methods, I believe you will notice the difference before the season is over. Your cucumber plants will have a better chance to stay healthy, your harvest will last longer, and you will spend less time worrying about every little problem. There is still one final lesson I always remind myself of at the end of every growing season, because it brings everything together and helps me start the next year with much more confidence than the last one. When I look back at all the seasons I have spent growing cucumbers, I realize that the biggest improvements never came from expensive products or complicated techniques. They came from slowing down and paying attention to the little things that most people overlook. I learned to recognize cucumber beetles before they became a serious problem instead of after they had already spread disease through the garden. I learned that yellow sticky traps are not there to solve everything by themselves, but they give me valuable time to react early. I learned that lightweight row covers protect young plants when they need it most, and that removing them at flowering allows nature to finish the job through pollination. I discovered that powdery mildew does not have to ruin an entire season if I notice the first white patches and respond with simple methods like milk sprays, baking soda mixtures, or properly applied neem oil while continuing to improve airflow and keep the leaves as dry as possible. None of these ideas are difficult, and that is exactly why they have stayed useful for so many years. They fit into everyday life without making gardening feel like hard work. I believe that is one reason so many experienced gardeners continue using them season after season. They save money, they save time, and they help avoid disappointment. Every morning when I walk through the garden, I still enjoy checking a few leaves, turning them over for a quick look, and seeing healthy vines covered with flowers and fresh cucumbers. Those quiet moments remind me that gardening rewards patience far more than speed. If this season has been difficult for you, do not give up, because every experienced gardener has lost plants, and every one of us has learned valuable lessons through those losses. Start with one or two of these simple habits and let them become part of your routine. Next season, add another small improvement, and before long you will notice that your garden feels easier to manage and your harvest becomes more reliable. I still discover new ideas every year, and that is one of the reasons I never get tired of gardening. There is always another simple method worth trying, and another lesson waiting in the next growing season. I hope you will join me again because the next time I want to show you another practical trick that many gardeners overlook but that can make an even bigger difference than most people expect.